The flame lasted 6 seconds. In those 6 seconds, Daniel Keller saw polished oak 8 inches above his face, cream satin lining, brass hinges on both sides. A coffin. He was inside a coffin. He let the lighter die. Darkness. Total, absolute, the kind that presses against your open eyes and makes no difference whether they're shut. His breathing was loud. Too loud. Each exhale bounced off the lid and came back warm against his face, carrying the faint sourness of his own carbon dioxide. Daniel Keller was 31 years old, a construction foreman from Medford, Oregon, and the last thing he remembered was the parking lot behind Duke's Bar on Highway 62. A van door sliding open. Hands grabbing his jacket collar from behind. A chemical smell, sweet, sharp, wrong. Then nothing. And now this. He flicked the lighter again. 3 seconds this time, just enough to check his pockets. Phone gone. Wallet gone. Keys gone. One disposable cigarette lighter, translucent blue, maybe a third of the fuel remaining. That was everything. That was all he had between himself and the dark. The air inside a standard coffin, and some part of his brain was already running the math. The confined space training math his company made him sit through every April was roughly 820 liters. A calm adult consumes about half a liter of oxygen per minute. That gave him approximately 90 minutes. Maybe less. He'd already wasted some screaming before the math kicked in. So he stopped screaming. Okay. He said it out loud. His voice sounded wrong, flat, dead, no echo, no resonance. Just the word hitting satin and wood and dying right there. Okay. Think. He pressed his palms flat against the lid and pushed. Hard, then harder, elbows bracing against the satin-lined floor beneath him. Nothing moved. Not a creak, not a flex, not a millimeter of give. Whoever had sealed this coffin had done it properly. He could feel the weight above, not hear it, not see it, but feel it in the absolute stillness, in the way the wood didn't vibrate even slightly when he struck it with the heel of his hand. Packed earth. Maybe 4 feet. Maybe 6. He ran his fingers along the seam between lid and base. Continuous, tight, no gap wider than a playing card. His fingernails caught on the brass hinges near his head. The screws were smooth, countersunk, flush. No way to grip them without a flat head and leverage he didn't have. Daniel had spent 3 years in the Army, 12 Bravo, combat engineer. He'd crawled through culverts and drainage systems in Helmand Province with 150 pounds of gear. He knew confined spaces. But those spaces had exits. Those spaces had radios. Those spaces had people counting heads. Here, nobody was counting. His ex-wife had primary custody. His crew wouldn't notice until Monday morning. It was Friday night. He pressed his ear flat against the coffin floor and listened. Nothing. No traffic vibration. No water movement. No distant voices. Just the wet, rhythmic thud of his own pulse, too fast, maybe 110 beats per minute. He was buried deep enough that the surface world had been completely erased. Then he noticed something. The coffin floor had give. Not the lid, the floor. He shifted his weight and pressed down with his lower back, concentrating on one spot. The wood flexed. A quarter inch, maybe less. But it flexed. The lid above him was solid oak, dense, heavy, built to last. The floor was not. Thinner. Lighter grain. Pine. Probably half-inch, maybe 3/8. Cheaper wood, because who inspects the bottom of a coffin? Whoever put him here had spent money where it showed, polished lid, satin lining, brass hardware, and cut corners where it didn't. Daniel's mind did what it had done 1,000 times on job sites. It found the weak point in the structure. The floor, he whispered. Go through the floor. The plan was insane and he knew it. Even if he punched through the pine, he'd be digging into soil, blind, on his back, in a sealed box with a shrinking air supply. Dirt would pour in. He'd have to put it somewhere. The only somewhere was into the coffin around his own body, packing it along his sides as he worked. If the soil was clay-heavy, it might hold shape. If it was loose sand, it would flood in and suffocate him faster than the carbon dioxide already building in his lungs. But the alternative was lying still in a satin-lined box and dying quietly. Daniel Keller had never done anything quietly in his life. He flicked the lighter and held the flame close to the coffin floor, scanning. There, a knot in the pine, dark and oval, the size of a quarter. Stress point. Natural weakness. He pressed his thumb into it, and felt the surrounding wood give just slightly, the fibers less dense around the imperfection. A disposable lighter has a metal wind guard around the flame mechanism. That guard has an edge. Not sharp, but harder than pine. He started scraping the metal guard against the wood, working in a tight circle around the knot. The sound was enormous in the silence, a grinding, rasping noise that filled the coffin and seemed to vibrate in his teeth. Shavings fell onto his chest. Fine pine dust drifted into his nostrils, and he turned his head sideways, breathing through the fabric of his shirt collar. 15 minutes of scraping. His thumb was raw, the skin peeling where it gripped the lighter. The groove around the knot was maybe 1/8 of an inch deep. He did the math again. At this rate, he'd need another hour to cut through. He didn't have another hour. He had maybe 60 minutes of breathable air, and the headache building behind his eyes was the first whisper of CO2 accumulation. Stay in order. He said it like he was talking to his crew. Calm. Direct. Like there was a procedure. Breathe. Think. Adjust. He stopped scraping and pressed his knuckle against the knot itself. Then he punched it. Straight down, base of his palm, a sharp percussive strike. Pain shot through his wrist and up his forearm. He punched again. Again. On the 4th hit, the knot shifted. On the 7th, it cracked and dropped away into the darkness below the coffin floor. Cool air, not much, but distinctly cooler than the stale heat of the coffin, rose through the hole. Dirt air. Earth air. The mineral smell of wet soil, rich and alive, the most beautiful thing he'd ever inhaled. 50 minutes. Maybe. He worked the lighter's metal guard into the hole and started prying, levering splinters outward, snapping the thin pine in ragged chunks. Each piece that broke free let more soil press against the opening. He pushed it back with his fingertips, then scooped loose earth into the coffin beside his ribs. The box was becoming both workspace and dumping ground. Dirt accumulated along his sides, against his hips, cold and heavy. His range of motion shrank with every handful. He could feel the coffin walls pressing closer, not physically moving, but the available space between his body and the wood was filling with packed earth. Claustrophobia layered on top of claustrophobia. Within 20 minutes, he'd opened a gap roughly 8 inches across in the coffin floor. Soil was pressing in steadily. He packed it everywhere he could, around his legs, under the small of his back, beside his head. The pine dust and the earth smell and the sweat had created a paste on his skin. He was becoming part of the ground. His fingers broke through a layer of packed clay and touched something that wasn't soil. Fabric. Coarse, thick. Like burlap or landscape cloth. He pulled at it, tearing it sideways, and beneath it his fingers found loose gravel. Small, rounded stones, the kind you lay under a foundation footing for drainage. He almost laughed. Almost. Because drainage gravel meant construction prep. It meant someone had dug this grave in a spot with existing site work, a building pad, a foundation that was graded and prepped and then abandoned. And that meant the burial depth might not be 6 feet. If they'd hit gravel at 3 feet and decided that was deep enough for a coffin, then there were only 36 inches of earth above him instead of 72. 3 feet. Not 500 pounds of soil. Maybe 200. Maybe less. Go, he said. Right now. Go. He punched upward through the gravel. Stones bit into his knuckles and tore skin from his fingers. Blood made everything slippery, but he kept pulling material down, packing it into the coffin, packing it against and around and over his own body. His legs were buried now. His hips. He could barely twist his torso. The earth was swallowing him from the bottom up. He flicked the lighter one last time. The flame was tiny. A pale blue nub, barely visible, starving for the same oxygen his lungs were starving for. The headache was a steel band across his forehead now. He let the flame go out, and didn't try again. The next 8 minutes happened in total darkness. He dug with both arms extended above his head, fingers clawing through a mix of gravel and clay and root fragments. Soil rained down onto his face. He sealed his lips and breathed through his nose in short, filtered pulls. Each breath was thinner than the last, not empty, not yet, but thinning, like trying to drink from a glass that's almost dry. His shoulders burned. His cracked knuckles sent white jolts of pain up both arms every time they struck a stone. The shaft above him was maybe 18 inches wide, and he could feel its walls pressing against his forearms. If it collapsed, if the soil shifted and filled the gap, he'd be buried with his arms above his head and no way to dig down again. Then his right hand broke through something soft. Not soil. Not gravel. Not clay. Grass. Cold, wet grass, root side up, the underside of a living lawn. Night air poured down the shaft and hit his face like ice water. Cold, clean, enormous air, air that went on forever, air connected to the sky, to the wind, to the entire breathing world above him. He sobbed. Once. Then he kept digging. He widened the hole with both hands, pulling turf aside, dragging himself upward through the shaft. His head broke the surface. Stars. Oregon stars, winter sharp, scattered across a black sky. More of them than he'd ever noticed in 31 years of living beneath them. He pulled his shoulders through, then his chest. Dragged his legs out of the ground like a man hauling himself from a swimming pool. Collapsed face down on wet grass, arms spread, cheek pressed into the cold earth. He just breathed. In and out. In and out. The air was maybe 42 degrees, and it was the finest thing he had ever tasted. Daniel Keller dug himself out of his own grave with a disposable lighter and his bare hands. If that doesn't stay with you tonight, nothing will. Subscribe, because history is full of people who refuse to stay buried, and their stories deserve to be heard. He lay on the grass for a long time. Long enough for the shaking to slow from violent to manageable. When he finally raised his head, he saw a clearing bordered by Douglas firs, no structures visible, a dirt road running east about 50 yards away. He stood. His legs barely held. His hands were destroyed, knuckles split, fingernails cracked and packed with black soil, the third metacarpal in his right hand grinding in a way that meant fracture. His clothes were soaked through with sweat and earth. He walked downhill. Because downhill leads to water, and water leads to roads, and roads lead to people. That was the order. Stay in order. 40 minutes later, headlights. A pickup truck, coming around a bend. He stood in the center of the road and raised both bleeding hands. The truck stopped. A woman in her 60s opened the driver's side door and looked at the dirt-covered man standing in her headlights at 3 in the morning. "I need help," Daniel said. "Someone buried me." She called 911 without a single question. Deputies arrived in 18 minutes. An ambulance took him to Providence Medford Medical Center, where they treated hypothermia, lacerations on both hands, early CO2 toxicity, and the fractured metacarpal. The investigation traced back to a contracting dispute, a land deal on a commercial project that had gone bad 3 months earlier. 2 men were arrested within the week. The burial site was found exactly where Daniel described it. A clearing east of Upper Table Rock, on a lot that had been partially graded for a warehouse foundation never completed. The gravel layer that saved his life was drainage prep from a project abandoned in 2016. The coffin was a floor model, bought secondhand from a funeral supply liquidator in Grants Pass. $420. The pine bottom, the corner that was cut, the weak point Daniel found in the dark with his fingers, existed because someone chose the cheaper build. A reporter asked Daniel, months later, what he was thinking during those first minutes in the coffin. He said he wasn't thinking about dying. He was thinking that his daughter Grace had a soccer game on Saturday morning, and he was not going to miss it. Grace was 7 then. She's 12 now. She doesn't know the full story. She knows her dad was hurt, and that he came home. The lighter sits in a kitchen drawer in Daniel's house. Translucent blue, disposable, still holding a trace of fuel. He doesn't smoke. Never smoked. He still has no idea whose lighter it was or how it ended up in his jacket pocket on the worst night of his life. Some evenings, after Grace is in bed, he steps out the back door and stands in the yard. Not doing anything in particular. Just standing in the open air, looking at the stars, feeling the grass under his boots. The ground beneath his feet is solid. He checks sometimes. Presses down with his heel, just slightly. Just to make sure.